Welcome back to What Are You Saying, the realest podcast in the world. I'm Osama.
My name is Mohammed, and welcome to today's episode. We're so ecstatic and happy to have a guest with us. Every single day, with every single conversation, we try to extract things from people that we could take as intangibles to perceive and prove forward as we move on with our daily lives. Every guest offers insight, meanings, and ways that we could learn, better ourselves, and be better as individuals to our families, communities, and those others. And today's guest is very renowned because of the fact that she is who she is, the fact that she does so much in the Muslim community, the fact that she is a public speaker, the fact that she's an advocate for public policy that helps people globally. It's very amazing to have someone that is Director of Research for the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding related to Muslim communities in the U.S. It is amazing when you have someone that is the Executive Director of the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies, where it's actually a renowned center for Muslim population worldwide, including the Muslim West Facts Project. And not only do we have someone that is a co-author of a book titled Who Speaks for Islam? What a Billion Muslims Really Think, and how the book is based on extensive surveys conducted to provide insights into the view of Muslims around the world. With this person, with so much she has done, with this interview, with this hour, we are here to talk to the one, the only, Dalia Mogahed. Welcome to today's episode. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, Muhammad and Osama. It's so nice to be with you. I just wanted to make one clarification to that very generous introduction that you just shared. I am now the former Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, and now an affiliated scholar with the organization, still doing research, but no longer heading up the research as Director of Research.
No problem. Thank you so much for the clarification. And for the first question, we definitely want to know, how was it as far as your upbringing growing up? Where were you born? And how was life as far as daily around being around your family?
It's a big question. Thank you for it. I was born in Cairo, Egypt, and I came to the United States when I was 5 years old. We landed in Madison, Wisconsin, so a place as cold as Toronto. And I basically, attended public school from kindergarten all the way through college in Madison. My parents came to the U.S., both of them as graduate students pursuing their doctorates in civil engineering. So they met in college. My mother was the only woman in the entire class of aeronautical engineering students at Cairo University. This is a huge class of like 10,000 students. She was the only one there doing, literally rocket science. And so my parents met and got married in Egypt, of course, and that's where I was born. That's where my one of my sisters was born. And then we moved to Madison, Wisconsin for them to pursue their higher education, for them to pursue their PhDs. Now, what was it like growing up in my household? As you might expect, my parents were incredibly serious about our education. So it's me, and I'm the oldest, and I have two younger sisters. One of them, Yasmin Mogahed, she says Mogahed, is very well known, mashallah. And then my youngest sister, Mona, is not someone who has chosen a role in the public domain, so less well known. But the three of us, three girls, we were just absolutely expected to excel academically. And there was a lot of emphasis on the importance of education, as important as oxygen in our household. Anything less than a 4.0 was completely unacceptable. We had very, very high expectations of us. And we all fulfilled them. We all were, alhamdulillah, mashallah, very good students. So that's one aspect of our childhood is education was incredibly emphasized. The other thing that I think is really important is we never had a ton of money. We grew up, my parents were graduate students, and they're not sort of known for having huge salaries. So we're like barely making it, but we never felt poor. We never felt like we didn't have enough because we always had good food to eat, and we were always had outings on the weekends. So and even after they graduated, they were professors and researchers at the university. Also, not huge salaries. We were never rich, but we always felt that our life was very enriched. And then the other thing that I think really epitomized or distinguished my family life is the role of service to the community. My parents were always in the service of others. There was always, especially after we moved out of student housing and had like a house, we always had somebody at our house staying with us, hosting somebody who just got to the city and needed hadn't gotten a place to live, or a refugee, or a victim of domestic violence or abuse that needed a place to stay. Like, we were constantly, always had somebody else staying with us or a family staying with us all the time. That was just the norm. That's what I grew up with, is my parents were always in the service of others. My father, Allah yarhamu, he passed away 2 years ago. He was the principal of the Islamic weekend school, so Sunday school basically. And he did that tirelessly, unpaid, volunteer for something like 25 years or 30 years. It was an enormous amount of time. Every single Sunday he was there administering the school. And, kids who went to that school are now in their 40s and look back on that as something, as a formative experience that they got to learn their faith through that incredible work that my dad did. So I guess if that's what, I hope I answered your questions. Those are some of the thoughts I can share. My childhood wasn't perfect. It wasn't like, it had its moments of challenge and pain and so forth. But I definitely feel like I was given a very strong foundation in terms of an ethical framework, and that was always Islam, an Islamic ethical framework with which to go out into the world and understand how I fit in, and then an example of service, of having a responsibility, not just to your own survival, but to helping others who needed it, if you could.
Honestly, that's such an amazing answer. And I want to touch on something that you kind of said. So obviously you said like you weren't like growing up, you never had the best like conditions growing up. Though, mashallah, your father still did acts of service and helped you. Why is it that you feel like you, your family, your siblings still abide by the acts of service? Like, for example, someone can be in a position of, whether they're not well financially, but they don't feel as if they need to help else. Why was it so important to you, even now, in your position, to continue to help out others?
I think that, the example I saw in both my parents was they really measured their time on earth with their utility to others. My dad would talk about wanting to be useful, wanting to be of service. And when he passed away 2 years ago, we always knew he was doing so many things in the community, but people started to come and tell us he was, ways that he helped them, but we had no idea about. He was doing things we didn't even know about, in addition to the things that we were aware of. So I think it's the idea of, the question being, why are we even here? Why are we on this earth? Is it just to accumulate degrees and prestige and money, or is it to make a difference in someone's life? And I think my father was very committed to his academic career. But what I actually believe happened is after he got his PhD and started, his work as a scientist and a researcher, and he filed some patents and got some awards and so forth, I think it was not as fulfilling as he thought it would be. And he really wanted to make a real difference in people's lives. And so he would do all these extra things and all these volunteer projects that, and he would do them so consistently. They weren't sporadic. They were these like consistent things of imagined decades of volunteering. I mean, that blows my mind. I get bored, sometimes after a month of volunteering somewhere. But my father, oh my God, 25, 30 years of this very, very time consuming and labor intensive and often thankless job of Sunday school principal. Anyone who's done that job knows how hard it is. So your question is really good. Like, why? And I think it goes back to the idea of what makes a good life. And I had this post after my father passed away. It was a picture of his watch, which I had asked if I could have, basically. And my family, my sisters and my mom let me have it. And I wear his watch because it reminds me of how much he invested of his time, which is the most scarce and precious resource we have, into helping others. And that he felt like the measure of a good life, what he taught us is the measure of a good life is the time you spent in service to others. He absolutely modeled this concept, this principle. And so his watch reminds me of that. And I always wear it when I go to a speaking engagement, just to remind me what I'm trying to do there, or to a community meeting, or to any place where I'm trying to be of service. His watch it was just so it was sort of an iconic part of his persona, because it looked, it looks like an engineer's watch, and he would always have it on. So I think it comes down to this idea of, how do we measure a good life? How do we measure a life well lived? And it's symbolized by his watch of time in the service of others.
Incredible, beautiful answer. And I totally agree. And that whole aspect about your father, your mother, everything they did, their service, that footstep, that groundwork, that foundation that they laid for you guys, it was so easy for you guys to walk in their footsteps, because they literally laid the pathway for who you guys ultimately became, alhamdulillah, in each and every respective career. And that's why, like, when it comes to parents, that service, that gratitude, that love is unconditional, because if they're really doing it for us, it will show once they're gone. And life is sacred. Time is sacred. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. Life is only but a number of breaths. And like I always say, like, you really do not know the significance of one's life until after they're gone. Because in this time where the people that met the person, knew the person, spent time with the person, is able to advocate all the things that people did not see, the small things that people took advantage of or people did not understand. And when you realize what a person is able to do, it's literally incredible. So your father, who he was, and that connection you have, especially with the watch, it shows why you are who you are and the things you continue to do, because that timeless piece of advice, that timeless sense of memories, is always going to carry wherever you go. And that's like a lesson and a reminder for all of us in our journey as well.
We spoke about a lot in your introduction. Obviously, you mentioned education, how hijab was within your family. And I guess my first question to you is, what inspired you to pursue a career focused on research and advocacy for Muslim communities?
Yeah. What inspired it? I guess at a very early age, I had a very strong sense of justice and wanting to work for justice in some way or another. So it sort of started in an unlikely place because I majored in chemical engineering, which doesn't sound like what you might go to if you're, if your goal is social justice work. But even that, I felt like I wanted, in my mind as a young person, to find ways to help underdeveloped countries become more independent technologically and be able to grow their own, food better, or just develop in a way where they wouldn't be so dependent on foreign banks and loans and things that enslave them, like the World Bank and the IMF. So I had some semblance of consciousness of that dynamic of how countries are subjugated through debt. And in my, I guess, very naive way, thought that, technology could help with that. So, and I also wanted a job after college, right? I wanted to be able to like have an independent life. So chemical engineering sounded like a good idea at the time. And I did that. I went into chemi, and then at the same time, I was this kind of misfit engineer in that all of my outside, activities had to do with things that no other engineer was in any way involved with, like advocacy and advocating for different causes around the world and raising awareness about them. And those included the genocide in Bosnia at the time. That dates me, of course, as someone who went to college in the, early to mid 90s. And the sanctions on Iraq, which were killing millions of children. I was working on that, and then finally in especially the Palestinian, the occupation of Palestine and the oppression there. So those were kind of my three big causes, and I had different roles and organizations that worked on those. I helped organize protests against violence perpetrated by Israel or their occupation of Lebanon or of parts of Palestine. I wrote about it in my college newspaper and raised money for Bosnia. So I was very involved in all of those things, all of that kind of work, as I was doing chemical engineering. Two incredibly different worlds. I was the only engineer who wrote for like my college newspaper, for example. I was the only engineer who was involved in a lot of those causes, at least as an undergrad. And so what prompted this activism, because I guess for me it felt very natural, like how can I look around and see a genocide in Bosnia and not do something, even if it's do whatever I can. It just felt like I felt compelled, like how would anyone see something like this and not act? But I guess looking back and reflecting on it, a lot of people did nothing, right? Or a lot of people sort of watched it or ignored it or didn't even know it was happening. I've met people who went to college at the same time as me, and they were like, didn't even know this whole thing happened. But I mean, of course, I was tuned into it because it was other Muslims, and that really mattered. And they were being butchered and slaughtered and ethnically cleansed because they were Muslim. So where did that, how did I get to the idea of what I'm doing now, which is research and advocacy? So as I said, engineer who was doing all this social justice or international global justice work on the side as a college activist, and they felt like completely two separate worlds that had no connection to each other. And so after I graduated, I worked for corporate America, just had a very quiet life, had no advocacy. I got married. I had my first son. I was just living a kind of normal, you know, American Egyptian life. And I thought, my activism was a thing of the past. That was something I did in college, and now I'm an adult, and I'm raising a baby, and I have a corporate job. But then 9/11 happened, and that changed everything, and it brought the need to get back into a much more public advocacy role. And so that's kind of what brought me back to as someone who was had to speak out. Now, in my college days, I didn't really do almost any public speaking. Most of what I was doing was writing and organizing. So it was actually 9/11 that started me speaking publicly at all. Like, my first talk was for a high school classroom. And because I became the outreach coordinator at the Islamic Center of Pittsburgh, Dar es Salaam. And so anyway, that's how I started. It was my first public speech was in a high school classroom where a teacher called the Islamic Center and asked if there would be a speaker that could come and speak to their class about Muslims and Islam, in the wake of 9/11, just a few months after the attack. And we're still friends. This teacher, his name is John Donahue. And that was my first ever public speaking really role after college. So that's how it started. And after I got my MBA, I started working for Gallup, which does research, and that was the beginning of my work at kind of reconciling my science background and my advocacy background, because I was able to approach these questions of truth and justice and oppression and so forth from the perspective of the scientific method, right? Where you are trying to understand these dynamics by doing rigorous scientific survey research. And it was at Gallup that I kind of brought my two worlds together, the science side and the social justice side.
And when it comes to research, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, research is a big proponent, and these are the things you talked about, right? And what's really effective about it is how it's able to eliminate all these barriers, and how research, in a sense, is able to bring a sense of clarity to any issue or topic that's going on in society, and how those who are in research are able to act as advocates to either governments on any scale of level or different organizations as well for things that needs to be addressed. When it comes to Islam, especially in the West, like growing up for us, it's like when you go to school, it's like you go to school, go to university, get the degree, graduate, then work. People who want to do research are those who are like super interested in school, never want to leave and stuff. You don't really see the value of research. And when you think about it historically, yeah, we were class clowns once upon a time. But historically, when you think about Islam and the whole thing about scholarship and authorship and how the research, how we've actually been at the front of different sciences and fields, it's something that we should actually be in love with. It's something we should actually advocate for. It's something that should be a part of us as far as the community consensus about the beauty within research. Why do you think that people are not fond of research? And two, why do you think it's good for Muslims to actually want to do research? As far as, like you said, 9/11 was something that really wanted you to change the way in things that were being perceived. Right now we have Islamophobia and how it's really tough for Muslims in the West and worldwide. Research is one of those things that could help alleviate the trauma implications that all Muslims are dealing with in schools, at work, in different sectors of life.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reason research is sort of downplayed, it's hard for us to get funding and it's hard for people to understand its real value, is it's perceived as something like just as a intellectual exercise with no tangible benefit. And I think this is a huge misunderstanding. Because for me, what research does is it does at least two things that are incredibly important. One is it democratizes the debate. Because if you do well formulated representative research, you're giving people a voice, and you're understanding and hearing from people who don't have access necessarily to the halls of power or to the megaphones of the media. And so they're ignored. Their issues are ignored. Their challenges are ignored. Even what assets they bring to the table and to society are ignored in the absence of good research. They have no access to let people know or document their life story except through a good researcher coming and understanding who they are and their challenge. So it allows more people to be heard and allows us to address their needs when we do good research. And that's so important for the Muslim community. And that really inspired me, is this idea of let's democratize the debate. Let's not put the perception of who Muslims are and what they need in the hands of just people who have figured out how to use the media. And it ends up being, I mean, if you look around, who does use the media? Who knows how to use the media? A lot of times it's extremists and Islamophobes, and they're the only ones talking about the Muslim community and what they need and who they are. And everyone else, the other 99.999%, are being ignored and are being silenced. And so good representative, rigorous research allows that silenced majority to be heard, to be given voice. The second thing that's so important about research is it allows us to write our own stories, to write our own narrative, to interpret the realities of our own condition. And in the absence of that, we create a vacuum in which someone else will come and write our stories for us, who doesn't understand who we are. That's at best doesn't understand. At worst, has an antagonistic agenda against us and wants to write a very negative story. So when we do research on our own community, we can simply write an accurate story because we understand the nuances of our community and we understand what cultural context we're coming from. And it allows us to write our own story. It's like that African proverb that why is it that the hunter always wins against the lion in any story? Because the lion isn't the one writing the story. The lion doesn't have a pen. And that's a very insightful idea, is unless you are writing your own story, it will always be told where you're the villain. And that's what research gives us, is power and the capacity to document our own realities.
That is so true. I want to touch on kind of switch gears a bit. I want to talk about your public influence and your speaking engagements. You did mention a bit that you started off in college and you started speaking a lot. One thing I really want to ask you is part of obviously speaking to an audience about any topic is about storytelling, whether it's about Islam, how Muslims should be in the West. So what role does storytelling play in your public speaking? How do you choose what stories you tell and convey to your audience?
Yeah, storytelling is incredibly powerful. It's how we, humans learn. And it's how our emotions are moved. It's how we remember things is through stories. And there's so many stories in the Quran that tell us, that teach us different lessons and so forth. So how do I choose the story? Finding the right story, I would say, is like one of the most challenging aspects of devising or creating a good speech. And it's the thing that is the most labor intensive and difficult for me, because I'm both a very private person, so it's sometimes very hard to share a personal story, and it's it really takes an incredible skill to find the right story to explain or illustrate the point you're trying to make. So what I try to do is find a story that is unique, that is has an unexpected ending, has a twist, and that would resonate with the audience I'm speaking to. So it's not easy. I remember when I worked at Gallup, one of the hardest things about writing a book is finding stories that illustrate what the data is saying. I mean, this is something that the author would spend the most time on, and I think that's the case anywhere, is they're collecting stories from different sources. But I encourage everyone who wants to communicate, whoever you are, whatever kind of communication you're trying to do, to learn the art of storytelling. It's like an entire discipline. It's a whole science behind it. And you can do that, like Google it on or search on YouTube. There's really good videos that just teach you that skill. I think it's an incredibly important skill. Also I was just going to plug, since we're talking about communicating and conveying a point, I do want to plug this book that a friend of mine, he's very well known, Mehdi Hassan, wrote, and I really recommend it to anyone starting out trying to be a public speaker or getting into debates or trying to just be a better communicator in general. It's called Win Every Argument, and he just does a phenomenal job of laying out the principles of how to be persuasive, how to convey your point. So that's my plug for his book.
I actually want to add on to your point quickly, because before we started recording with you, we were just talking to one of our friends, and I remember I said that the difference between I tell people the difference between public speaking and like podcasting is when you're recording a podcast, you don't know the reaction you're going to get from the audience, because you're trying to be as engaging as possible, whether you're by yourself or with a guest, and trying to be as engaging with the topic you're speaking about. But you can easily tell when you're speaking in front of an audience if someone's engaging or not. And you're not going to start calling people out. It's like, hey, you front row, what did I say? So you really have to obviously know how to say something. It's like you're not going to have like that motherly or like fatherly role. It's like, hey, what did I say in my middle of the part? But because we have done a bit of our own speaking engagement at not proper organization in some schools, but I have realized, because I remember the first time we did it, it didn't go well, and it was a humbling moment, because obviously people would go to us and like we would always get that reaction, oh, someone said something so good. But subhanAllah, speaking engagement is not like the first time. It's like a lot of practice, trying to convey your point. The way you would say it to your friends or your family is different how someone else will perceive it on the receiving end when you're talking to someone you don't know.
And I think it's one of those things, like you said, of public speaking. It's tough thing because people do not understand the dynamics that goes into it. And that's why I really want to ask you this question, because since you are a public figure, you advocate for Muslim issues and topics, and you are one of the people on the front lines. Even though we talked about the beauty in storytelling, public speaking, there's a lot that comes with it, as far as nonstop scheduling, having to fly to different cities, having to adjust to different things as far as conferences and different stuff like that, meeting people at the airport or maybe alongside restaurants, don't have time to really sit down, have a quick bite. People might come up to you and ask for a picture and autograph. They don't have the time and stuff. They might take offense to it. So as much as people might want to be in the spotlight with everything that comes with it, there is a tough and grueling and tough process that comes with that as well.
Yeah.
Can you give us a glimpse into that and why it's you want people to understand as much of a great thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has actually put you in this position. There are other things that comes with it that's going to make you really question whether could this be worth it, or how people can misperceive you as being rude or arrogant just because you've been through a lot. They don't know what you're going through.
Right.
We only know what we see from you if you post something or YouTube video and stuff like that. So how is it dealing with that dynamic?
No, it's a really good question. And, just back to Osama's point earlier about addressing an audience and how it can go well or not. And like, yeah, a podcast is different because you can't see your audience, but you can definitely tell if your audience is engaged when you're in the room with them. I'll just start with that, and then it'll kind of make sense to answer the second question. It's extremely, extremely difficult on a public speaker. At least myself, I guess I'll just speak for myself. It's very, very hard when someone's on stage pouring their heart out, because it takes 10 times more energy to be on stage giving a talk than if you were saying the exact same thing to someone sitting next to you, to one other person. At least for me as an introvert, that takes at least 10 times the energy, and 10 times the focus, and 10 times the presence. And then when people are talking, or you're forced to speak over dinner and there's just clacking of forks, or there's a huge number of people just on their phones, it's so difficult to do the talk. It is so hard. It's very distracting. And I think people don't quite understand that when you're on stage, at least for me, I'm having a conversation with the audience. And if you're having a conversation with someone and they're on their phone, it's very hard to keep talking to them. Or they're just totally disengaged or talking to someone else. How are you going to have a conversation with someone if they're literally talking to someone else? So that is how it feels for me, because as an introvert, I'm not speaking to a huge room of people. I'm actually having a conversation one-on-one with each person separately. And that might sound strange, but that is how I do it. And that's the only way I can do it. So it's a very taxing activity to get on stage and have a mic and then have to convey a message to an audience. And it's wonderful when they're engaged and they're captivated, but it's not always you can say the exact same thing, and some audiences are absolutely locked in with you, and then some are just totally disengaged, and it's really hard to and they're both Muslim audiences at some kind of a dinner, and it's hard to figure out what's the difference. But it can be very, very difficult to do that. And what I try to do is I'm not up there trying to perform. I think that's maybe the myth, is that a public speaker is a performer, and it's the same if they're, alone in their room or up on stage. It doesn't matter. It's like, no, for me, I'm having a conversation with the audience. So the audience's energy back to me is extremely important. And I try to give the speech that I need to hear. That's how I figure out what to say, is like, what do I need to hear right now? So I've been asked this a lot about Gaza, and what I need to hear is how to keep hope and not sort of fall into despair. How do I stay energized to keep working and speaking when it feels so overwhelming and so deflating? And so that's the speech I keep giving, because I absolutely need to hear it. Now, Muhammad, you asked about sort of the backstage reality of that kind of a lifestyle or a life or a job. And it is like getting on a plane obviously for me, economy, you're flying economy. Usually there's a connecting flight. There's delays. You're hungry. You're tired. You're breathing, recycled air. You land. You're exhausted, oftentimes, not always, but you're kind of expected to be on and available and talkative, and that's really really hard sometimes. You get to your hotel room. You know I always talk about how prayer is so important, salah, because that's what grounds me to feeling like I belong. Because I'm in some random hotel room in some random city, I feel very like out of place until I perform my salah in that room, and then I feel like I belong here because I'm worshiping Allah here. So this is Allah's earth, and so I'm His creation. I'm a servant, and I'm here to serve Him. I belong here, and it just kind of gives me a sense of place when I do my salah. So having an app on my phone that changes with my location, so I always know when my salah times are, but also my the qibla. One thing, just as an aside, that I love about anytime I'm in Muslim majority countries is that the qibla is marked in any hotel room. I feel like there's something about that makes me feel very at home. But obviously that's not the case in North America. So you find your qibla with your phone, and I mention that because it's actually an incredibly significant part of how I survive travel. Travel is hard. Because you wake up the next morning and for a second, you literally don't know where you are. Where am I? Am I in Seattle? Am I in New York? Am I in Atlanta? Like, you don't for a second know, especially if you're traveling a lot. You wake up confused, and it's very unsettling until you kind of wake up and figure out, okay, here's where I am. And, and as an introvert, keep going back to that, it's draining to be around people all day, and people sometimes demand it, and it's not that I'm rude or I'm standoffish. I'm just sometimes it's very hard to fall asleep in a bed that's not yours, so you're exhausted, you're sleep deprived, you have to perform later that day, and so it can be very challenging to be expected to be like on and engaging with people socially all day before an event. And then after an event, I am so exhausted and drained from the amount of expenditure that I had to do being on stage, or, and delivering something that's really heartfelt, because my talks are all very, very from my heart. I'm not, even if I'm reading, they're still from my heart. They're not just something I'm kind of like mindlessly reciting. It's something that I feel very deeply. And so and then just being on stage is very draining. So when people are like, oh, let's go out to dinner after an event, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to collapse. So it's, I guess to understand all of that background, I think is important. So if you're hosting as a speaker, to just extend more grace than you might otherwise, knowing how challenging it can be. But to just end that, I do want to emphasize how grateful I am to have the opportunity to do this kind of work, and how grateful I am for the communities that invite me into their space and take time out of their lives to come out and hear me speak. Incredible gratitude to those communities, to those people who attend, and then to Allah for giving me this opportunity.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, I actually just want to touch on quickly something you said, which I kind of resonate with before we go into pretty much our last conversation with you. Is that I think for me, I don't do that big speaking event, inshallah, one day, but I think every speaker has this bubble where when they're speaking, they feel like nothing can really affect them. They're there to do their purpose. But I think a lot of the times people who obviously are fans of you and they go to you, sometimes they expect you to have that same mannerism, the same personality that you have on stage. Sometimes you might act different on stage just because it's part of your storytelling, it's part of your story. But as you said, you're an introvert. We're also kind of introverts as well. We don't post too much on our social media. No one knows anything about our personal lives. I think a lot of people feel like they have access to you. Oh, well, Dalia said this on stage. I want to go and say this. Sometimes you have to understand the barrier. I remember last year we actually met with Sheikh Abdullah Uduro, who we had on our podcast last week. And I remember I said, telling him, let's ask him to get on our podcast. Just me being, I guess, impatient, being Palestinian. And also too, he was like, hey, let's not be those people that go and like barge. I'm like, you know what? I think you're right. But subhanAllah, he appreciated it because everyone was going, asking him, hey, can we take a picture? Can we take a picture? But we just kind of showed him our respect. And he's the one that asked to take a video with him. And alhamdulillah, we did. But I do realize to all to all viewers who are listening, I don't think no one has the issue of taking that picture with you. But if you're being mindful and saying, hey, sorry to bother you, do you mind if I can take a picture with you? I mean, if they say no, don't take it personally. A lot of the times, we have things going on personally. I think a lot of people take it personal. Oh, this person's rude, this person's this, which is obviously not the case. And it's always good to think of the other person, which kind of leads me to our last question. On your you did a TED Talk a while back ago, spoke about a lot of stuff, obviously hijab, what Islam means to you. So I guess, what does Islam mean to you? And we do have some subtopics that we want to talk about, but you being like, you came to America at the age of 5, you grew up there. How did Islam change your perspective versus obviously living in the Middle East versus living in America? What does Islam mean to you now being raised in the West?
Yeah, that's a big question. Islam for me is like, it's honestly the air I breathe. It's almost hard to imagine existing without this as my reality. It's like a fish in water. It doesn't even know what water is, it doesn't realize there's another way to be. But sometimes I get a glimpse of what it's like to not have this prism through which you see life, a prism of tawheed, a prism of there's an akhirah, and I become much more grateful for it. What Islam means to me, living in the West, is I have the advantage of deeply rooted guidance, where most people around us actually have no idea what their purpose is. I can actually say that with confidence. Most people kind of go through life in a total state of ghafla. And Muslims are not immune, obviously. But this state of trying to fill the hole in our hearts that is meant for Allah with every other distraction and drug, and not just meaning like a substance, but any addictive, any distraction or something that sedates you. Could be work, it could be porn, it could be money, whatever. And so we're chasing these other things, trying to fill this hole in our hearts that can never be filled with anything else other than Allah. And that causes incredible suffering. So for me, Islam is seeing reality as it is, seeing the truth of the world, seeing that this is all an illusion, having the comfort of knowing that there is an akhirah, there is a hereafter, there is an afterlife in which the wrongs of the world will be made right, where the voiceless will get to speak, where the oppressed will get to be triumphant. And it gives me incredible comfort. And the only way that I can keep going, when I watch the kind of massacre that is happening in a place like Gaza, a place like Sudan or the Congo or anywhere else where there's human suffering, if I didn't have Islam grounding me, I wouldn't be able to keep working. And I think that that's the important piece that sometimes people miss about belief and faith in an afterlife is they think that it would take away your motivation to make this world better. Far from it. It's quite the opposite. It's the only thing that keeps me from total despair in my work to make things better. Because if I didn't believe that there was actual accountability that would be, you know, that would actually be administered or executed on, I would give up. It would just seem so hopeless. So Islam gives me the hope and the motivation and the resilience that I need to not give up, to stay the course, to serve in the best capacity that I can, because I know that it's not up to me. It's precisely because I know it's not up to me that I can keep going.
Alhamdulillah. And that's why this religion is beautiful, it's remarkable. And those aspects that you covered is the reason why we're able to push every single day, despite the obstacles, the hardships, and things that might come your way. This religion's enticing, it's soothing, it's very powerful, and there's many layers once you step into it. And I think that's one of the identity crisis that we have growing up in the West, is the fact that you're exposed to so many things through television shows and stuff like that. I remember for us growing up in elementary school, especially high school, talks with sisters and everything, they're like, you can't imagine how we feel when the most objectifiable thing that guys want you to be is based off a magazine cover.
Yeah.
Like, if you do not look such a way or such a part, you're outcasted, you're neglected, you're just pushed aside.
Right.
And how do you deal with that day to day?
Very true.
And if this religion is something that's so beautiful and I'm taught that it's the best thing in the world, why do I go into a space and a circle with students year after year and they don't give me that same respect, or they don't give me that same of, like, friendliness and stuff like that, just because I'm perceived different? It's such an identity crisis for guys and girls, because we're trying to figure out, what do we take from it? What do we keep from it? And is it really beneficial for us? And it's not until, if Allah is able to, Allah guides who He wills.
Mm-hmm.
If you're really able to step into this religion and see the benefits and what it contains, you really know that this thing is incomparable. And what those desires or things that you might find attractive about some culture, whether it's in music, entertainment, films, and stuff like that, is not beneficial. It's only a waste of time, and there's no growth from it. And that aspect about accountability that you talked about is incredible, because those who are oppressed, it's still accounted for. And even if they're not able to make up for their actions to those who they oppressed on the hereafter, they will have to answer for those things. And they will not be able to speak for themselves, because everything they did will be used against them. So that is why we take everything with caution, and you don't take anything for granted. Like, you treat the janitor the same way you treat the president.
Absolutely.
They're both human beings at the end of the day, right? Yeah. And for our final part, we just want to ask you some questions, just to know.
It's a fun game.
Fun game. And we're going to start it off. So what is your favorite surah in the Quran?
Right now it's Surah Yusuf. And by the way, just a plug, I have a podcast as well called Quran Conversations, where I am discussing Surah Yusuf with my teacher, Imam Muhammad Majid. So check it out.
I'm not gonna lie, Surah Yusuf is my favorite surah for like a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
You should check out the podcast.
I honestly, I was gonna listen to it today, because when you texted me, when you messaged me on through emails, you were like, you have your own podcast and use Riverside. So I'm like, oh, let me go check it out, because I loved listening to like Islamic stuff more so now as I'm older. But yeah, your favorite ayah in the Quran.
Well, actually, right now it's actually an ayah in Surah Yusuf, which I don't want to recite because I think I'll get it wrong, even though I'm memorizing it. But let me just explain it, and then people can go look it up. So Yusuf alayhi salam interprets the king's dream, where he talks about 7 skinny cows eating 7 fat cows. And that's it. That's all he told him, the dream said. And so he interprets it that there will be 7 years of harvest and then 7 years of drought. And then he adds, and then the 15th year, there will be plentiful rain. And he tells them that they will be able to press for, press yasarun, press meaning juice, either oil or grapes. And that's the ayah that's so beautiful. That's that 15th year that he tells them about, even though it's not mentioned in his dream. The king's dream is 14 years only, 7 years of harvest, 7 years of drought. And so Yusuf alayhi salam adds this 15th year that he tells them will happen. And that's my favorite ayah, because it's so remarkable that he knew that this 15th year would happen, even though it's not part of the dream. My interpretation is that he knew that this is a principle of Allah, that after drought, there is a year of sweetness. And it, applying it to your own life, after a time of hardship, there will be a time of ease. It's a pattern of Allah. And I just absolutely love that meaning. And we're going to be discussing that particular ayah in the next couple of weeks on the podcast.
Inshallah.
I'm looking forward to that.
Inshallah. And who is your favorite prophet?
Well, it would actually be my favorite story. So, I think we should always qualify, aside from the Prophet Muhammad because he is absolutely my favorite prophet. But other than him, it would actually be Musa alayhi salam. And his story is so compelling. And I connect to it in so many different ways. So it would be Musa alayhi salam.
Yeah, Musa has a lot of great stories in law, because obviously the majority of the Quran he's mentioned, and so many things you can learn from.
Yeah.
From Surah Al-Kahf or Surah Al-Baqarah, so many stories that you can actually gravitate from and obviously learn from. Who would you say is your favorite companion of the Prophet ﷺ?
That's such a hard question.
It is, because they all have such vital and important role.
They're all giants, incredible people.
I think, I think I would have to say Khadija, radiallahu anha. I think she's an incredible human, and just an absolutely critical companion to Islam, to the growth and delivering of the message.
I think also just her relationship with Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how she supported him when everybody went against him and no one was listening. Having that, aside from her also being a supportive wife, because I remember we also go to tafsir classes in our near mosque. I remember our sheikh was talking about how Aisha radiallahu anha was asking Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam why Khadija meant much to him, and he's like, well, because she was there for him when no one wasn't. So it's aside from her accolades as a businesswoman, an entrepreneur, well respected, but also her being a supportive wife and being there for her husband, because at the end of the day, Sayyidina Muhammad was a prophet to humanity, but also he had a wife who was supporting him. So I think she's such a unique answer.
Yeah, exactly, for all those reasons.
And now we want to get into, what is your favorite food?
So is this cuisine in general, or the
It could be anything.
I love Egyptian food. So I'll just say that I absolutely love Egyptian food. I love macarona bil bechamel, which is, if you've never had it, you need to go find out who can make it for you. And I love mahshi crumb, which is stuffed cabbage. Those are very fattening foods. Those are my favorite foods. But in my day-to-day, actually, I really love healthy food. I'm a very healthy eater. I know I eat those kinds of things once a year, but I love healthy. I make great salads. I make salmon. I make chicken. I'm very, very committed to health and nutrition. So other than those Arabic food is absolutely deadly. You have to keep it for special occasions.
Arabic food is definitely deadly. Exactly. Well, do you have a favorite movie?
I'm going to skip that one just because I actually can't think of... I do watch movies. I just can't think of my favorite one. Not off the top of my head. I love them. There are some movies I just really love. These are just classics that we watch over and over, like The Princess Bride. is like a movie that we always reference. If you haven't seen it, it's like very old. It's from a long time ago, but it's just really funny and sweet.
You're talking about the 1987 version or the 2002 version?
Definitely the 1987 version.
Okay,
I saw the 87.
the one with the Andre the Giant. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, that version. Okay,
Yeah, Andre the Giant. I didn't
Amazing
even know
movie,
there
yeah.
was an updated version. I had no idea.
No, I'm mixing it with the Princess Diaries, the Anne Hathaway movie. Oh, we saw when we were kids. No, I was mixing the two.
Yeah, no, different movie.
And our last question: what is your favorite book?
Well, I mean, the book that actually really changed my life when I was 15 years old and when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. So that was the most impactful book for me.
Yeah, that is my favorite book as well. And I remember my dad making me read the book at the age of 6. My dad loves Malcolm X. He was in his fan clubs and everything.
6? Wow.
Yeah, so my dad had we had the hats and
That's so funny.
medallions
Wow.
and everything, the sweaters. So I would bring the book to school.
I remember.
I did a topic on Malcolm X or like
The speech,
speeching,
right? Yeah, speeches.
and they pretty much banned me from because I pretty much won the competition. So if you win the competition, you're able to speak in front of the school and then go do like a bigger.
Like a triathlon.
But because of policy and
Yeah.
everything, they pretty much told me like they wouldn't allow me and stuff like that. But
They said you were too controversial.
Oh my God.
Well, I think it's because our school was predominantly like Caucasian.
Yeah,
So it's like minorities were like really like
mid 2000s.
in like mid 2000s. So I remember when he did that speech, like, you know what? You had the best speech, but you're not gonna go.
You're not gonna go.
You're not gonna go through it.
But no, it's an incredible book. I highly recommend anyone to read that book by Alex Haley. And it's incredible because the more you learn about history, particularly that era, every time you go back to read it every few years or so, you're able to catch more of the references that Malcolm was speaking about. And it's an incredible book.
Yeah.
And with that, we definitely want to thank you so much for coming on today's episode, everything you talked about, the stories that you shared, and just your upbringing, your father, may Allah give him Jannah Firdaus, and your family. Like, what an incredible person. There's so much stories and who you are, your sister, and as well as your whole family. It's definitely shines
Definitely
through.
a true inspiration to like, young men, young women who want to pave the way for themselves, whether it's in engineering, business, or even being a speaker. I think you are definitely the catalyst for anybody to look at and be like, I want to be like Dalia Mogahed, or even like pave a way. We've had so much fun. Like we were just talking about, we were like writing notes amongst the things that you were saying, because the episode we had a different way of taking the episode, but subhanAllah, listening to you and like taking that information, we appreciate it, we well respect it. But before we end it off, we'd love for you to like shout out your social media accounts where they can follow you, your podcast.
Yeah, thank you. So you can follow me on Instagram at Dalia Mogahed, or on Facebook. My personal account is where I'm more active. Just look up my name. And those are kind of mostly Instagram is where I spend the most time. And then I'm also on X, but not as much. My podcast is called Quran Conversations, and you can find that page also on Instagram at Quran.conversations. And I'd love to hear from you, or if you get a chance to hear this episode, I'd love to hear your thoughts.